be here. This is amazing to have so many people come out and be part of this conversation. At Rainbow Services, we've been providing shelter and support services since 1983, and we've been partnering with the Window Between Worlds since 1994, which I recently found out from Cathy. And so, part of the reason why homelessness and domestic violence intersect is a lot of people leave their homes because of the violence they're experiencing. And in our society, we kind of leave the responsibility to change that to the victim. So the victim is often the one that has to leave their home in order to find a safe place for themselves and their families. So on a national level, the National Network NDV states that about 50% of women and children who are homeless because of domestic violence. We know as advocates that's probably way low and underreported. And HUD, the Housing and Urban Development of our federal government, has defined fleeing domestic violence as a category of homelessness. So, and they also report that 80% of homeless women and children have experienced domestic violence in their lifetime. So that's just like a broad stroke overview. And I'm going to now have Jessica Reed from LAHSA talk a little bit more about our local statistics. And LAHSA is the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, so they oversee a lot of funding in Los Angeles for homeless services.
Thank you. So like Elizabeth said, I'm Jessica Reed, I'm a policy analyst at the LA Homeless Services Authority. I just want to sort of thank you for giving sort of the national perspective with respect to the data. There are many percentages sort of thrown out there, floating out there, and what I can say is that it's often, domestic violence is underreported just in general, and so the estimates you hear, you can always think that's a low conservative count, most likely. The data that I can speak to from LAHSA comes from our annual homeless count that we do every year now. And this year, in January of 2016, so first of all, LAHSA oversees the Los Angeles Continuum of Care. What is that? It's basically LA County minus Glendale, Pasadena, and Long Beach. And so within our continuum of care, we found through our annual homeless count that 18% of the total population self-reported history of physical or sexual abuse, including domestic or intimate partner violence and or stalking. 12% of men self-reported that, 36% of women, and 37% of transgender people. So you can see the wide disparity when you start looking at this by gender. So like I said, the 18% figure is most likely an undercount because of its self-reported nature, but nevertheless, it's a staggering figure, right? It's 1 in 5 people experiencing homelessness in LA County or the LA Continuum of Care has experienced domestic violence. So no matter what, that's a pretty shocking number, and we need to talk about it. So I'm glad to have this conversation with y'all tonight.
Thank you, Jessica. And now it's my honor to introduce Councilmember Bonin. I'm sorry. He's going to speak briefly about the intersection between domestic violence and homelessness. He sits on the Homelessness and Poverty Committee and is an avid supporter of Proposition HHH, and is also the task force, the Domestic Violence Task Force Special Liaison to the City Council, and has supported the task force efforts in the city. So welcome.
Well, I'd like to thank Hillary for that. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. Thanks to G2 Gallery for having us. Thanks to Window Between Worlds. Thank you to the Domestic Violence Task Force. As Hillary just said, I'm very lucky. I am the City Council's liaison to the Domestic Violence Task Force. And Kozma and my staff really does a tremendous amount of work making sure that the city is responsive to the mission of the task force. I should acknowledge and thank Tantau who asked me to do this. One of the first asks I got when I was elected following the shoes of Mayor Garcetti, who was my predecessor. And Carol taps you on the shoulder to do what you're supposed to do. Something has changed this year. It used to be that there was one big domestic violence awareness event every year at City Hall. And it was in our stately and ornate marble chambers, and it was on a weekday in downtown Los Angeles. And some folks would show up. But this year the task force had the idea, let's try to do something in all 15 council districts so that there will be something in every part of town that might get some attention in various different neighborhoods, and that more people can show up and more people can hear and understand and spread the word about what a significant and pressing issue this is in the city of Los Angeles. I think in the city, we've done some things over the past couple of years that have improved the city's commitment to domestic violence awareness, but we are nowhere near where we need to be and where we have to be. And I want to thank the task force for pushing us really hard on that. We had a little bit of an event downtown last week where there was really, from Lee Sheedy, the principal representatives of the task force, a ringing half indictment, half call to arms on what needs to be done. And she was spot on in what she said, is we have a long way to go in drawing more attention and putting significantly more resources into this issue and into solutions. One of the areas that is so important to me that we work on is the intersection of domestic violence and homelessness. The numbers we just heard from LAHSA are staggering. Of the women who are homeless in Los Angeles, a third of them experience domestic violence. And an equally jarring number is, it's also one-third, it's about one-third of the women who are victims of domestic violence wind up being homeless immediately after escaping where they were suffering abuse. That's a huge number, and unless we end domestic violence, we're not going to end homelessness. And unless we address homelessness, we're not going to be properly addressing the issue of domestic violence here in Los Angeles. And we have a very long way to go. We have a new coordinated city and county strategy to deal with homelessness, and I think the city has been called out rightfully for not putting enough emphasis on domestic violence in our programs and in our solutions. And that's something I'm going to be working on fixing. At the same time, the federal government is just killing us. They are just killing us. The federal government has been cutting the kind of money and the kind of programming that helps people who are getting out of domestic violence situations and putting them into transitional housing. And the city and the county need to step in and fill that gap, and we will. It's going to be a battle, and it's going to be a constant call for attention and a constant fight for resources, but we're going to do it. One thing that we need in order to do that, and I'm a walking public service announcement commercial between now and November 8th, is we need to approve on the November ballot Proposition HHH. It's on the city ballot only. It would allow us to spend $1.2 billion over 10 years for the purchase, acquisition, construction of homeless housing or housing for people who are on the verge of becoming homeless. Every unit we build, the county will provide equivalent services. The county will be probably asking for more resources next year to increase what they do. But that not only will provide housing, but will free up some of our other homeless dollars to provide some of the transitional housing and some of the other services we need. It is vitally, vitally important that gets passed. It's a cornerstone of our homelessness strategy. And it requires a 2/3 vote to win. Always a high hurdle. The polling looks great. People really think that this is a hugely important issue and they're willing to invest in it. But it is at the very bottom of the ballot. I got my sample ballot. This is number 31 on my ballot. So my advice to everybody, when you vote, bottoms up. Start at the end of the ballot. Because I think anybody who starts at the very end will find their way to the Trump-Clinton vote. There are many folks who may start at the Trump-Clinton vote and just get so frustrated that they may stop there. So, bottoms up, yes on HHH. And if you live in a different council district or if you live in a different city, pressure your elected officials or your county supervisors for your federal and state officials to put more energy and money into this issue so that we can make sure that we have the resources for people who need to get out of the situation that they're in, and that we have places that everybody can go where they're safe, and that we can do more to make sure that they're not in an unsafe place in the first place. So thank you.
Okay, so I have some questions that people had dropped in. Is there a city that you would like to model policies on, or other cities where you've seen the intersection between homelessness and domestic violence addressed in an effective way?
That's a good question, Carol, is it?
We're all over the map. Our statewide organization has really taken the lead on reaching out to other entities, and that we get so enmeshed in our own stuff as far as to see the broad picture.
I think in Seattle and Washington State, they're doing some really, or is it King County?
King County, and then in Oregon, but Multnomah County.
In Multnomah County too. They're doing some ideas.
Pacific Northwest, generally.
Yeah. So how can we make LA great? Yeah. And are there any new services that are coming in that you're familiar with that are being developed?
Well, I think the thing that we as a city need to focus on more is making sure that there are more crisis beds for people getting out of domestic violence and threatening situations. Part of what's been cut, the city's done a better job over the past couple of years getting domestic abuse response teams in more of the police stations, but if we don't have a place for people to go, they wind up out on the street. And that's not a place where anybody should be, let alone a woman or a child who's escaping from domestic violence.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. And attest to the Councilmember Bonin's support of DV Rainbow Services actually lost our federal funding last year, and through the support of advocates like Councilmember Bonin, we were able to have the city step up and replace that funding at least for a year, but now I'll be talking to you soon.
Yeah.
So you were recording this. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. So I'd like to invite up our panel, Jessica Reed, who you've met from Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, and also Carol Tantau, who is on the board of the City of LA's Domestic Violence Task Force and has been very involved for many years. She's also the Support Services Coordinator at Sojourn, which is a project. Cathy Salser, the founder and executive director of Between Worlds. And Kozma, who is a field deputy for Councilmember Biden. So, let's see. So, Carol, would you like to start by telling us a little bit more about the needs of domestic violence survivors?
Well, I'm going to start with telling you how Sojourn came to be. By all reports, we're the second oldest domestic violence shelter in the state. And it grew out of the church in Ocean Park, which is like right around the corner here, where back in the 60s, they started providing services for bums, which is what we call homeless people. And, you know, they had a soup kitchen and they were, you know, trying to provide assistance to those people. And what happened is that they noticed that there was a certain segment of that population that were women research with those people, they determined that those women were not homeless, they simply were afraid to go home. So Sojourn actually grew out of a homeless services program. And it was we eventually established our first crisis shelter in 1977. And the original organization was a lot of volunteers. I mean, people were like taking people in and putting them in their couches with their kids. And it was primarily a group of radical lesbians who just didn't much care what people thought they were doing, and they just did it. And we still have that same house. We've grown a little since then. We do have a crisis shelter. We also have what we refer to as a second stage shelter, which is not exactly transitional. It's really for the women who have been through a crisis shelter and still aren't quite ready to get back on their feet. They haven't been able to secure employment and get enough resources together that they can really be self-supporting. So it's crisis shelter is a 40 to 45 day program. Our second stage shelter is a 6-month program, and so those are our two shelters. But in terms of what our agency does and how we meet the needs of our clients, I would like to tell you a story that my executive director always tells on the first night of our 40-hour training. And I think it really hits home with what we do. And it's sort of a fable about 3 women walking through the countryside, and they come up to a river. And when they look at the river, they see that there are these babies floating down the river. And so one of the women jumps into the river and starts pulling the babies out to the shore and performing CPR and rescuing them. And the second woman jumps into the river and starts teaching the babies how to float. And so these women are frantically working on the babies in the river, and they turn around, and the third woman is like walking up the river. And they say, "What are you doing? Why aren't you here helping us?" And he says, "I'm gonna go find the motherfuckers throwing them in." So we do occasionally have to rescue people, and that's what our crisis shelter is about. But we are trying to teach women how to float, and that's the empowerment part of our program. And that's really critical because we can't be with these women forever. But the third one's prevention, and that's really important. And that's a lot about what this event is about, is educating people, because we are never going to prevent domestic violence if we don't educate people about it. So that's what we do.
Thank you. And Jessica and I go to like lots of different meetings together, so we see each other regularly. And so you're going to speak to kind of some of the systems approach and what we're doing in Los Angeles to address ED.
Right. So, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you. Full disclosure, Cathy is my stepmom.
That's what I was sort of saying. Like, you shared that at one meeting, and then I thought that's not right.
Yeah. So I sort of came in, I've been working on homelessness and homelessness for several years now. And it was within the last, maybe at the beginning of the year, our executive director, Peterman, recognized that we really didn't have someone embedded within the space in the DV community. And he asked me to sort of fill that role and to start figuring out how to start tackling this issue where our systems intersect and all the myriad problems that sort of arise. So I have some colleagues here from LAHSA tonight, and Sylvia Williams has been holding it down at LAHSA and going to meetings, and but just really making sure that providers and advocates in the space see LAHSA as a partner and actually see LAHSA at their events and at their meetings. And another part of that relationship building is engaging the national, there's a national domestic violence technical assistance consortium.
I can if we have time.
Okay. But just engaging them because they're helping us to identify gaps and pain points and where, and recommend some solutions. And it's helpful to sort of have that outside perspective, I think, when you're sort of in it and invested and attached to the work. So the second part of my work has been improving what exists. So we have the homeless service delivery system, and then there's a network of domestic violence providers and a system there. Both systems are not perfect, but we need to, I think, in the reality is that we have limited resources. We all sort of have to deal with the fact that we don't have enough funding to actually meet the need, and so we have to retool, we have to fix our systems that currently exist. We have to maximize every single dollar, every single resource, and really make the intersections and the relationships and the networking seamless. So that's some of the work that we're doing. It's related to the homeless strategies. I'm not sure if speak about a little bit about the strategies. So the city and the county pass these comprehensive homeless strategies, and really neither plans had mentioned homelessness until advocates, DV advocates rallied and galvanized the city and the county at the 11th hour and got them to include some mention of domestic violence. And that is pretty much classic how it works in the city and the county right now with respect to DV. And I think the council member was really right to mention we need more. We just need more to meet the needs. The other part of the work I'm doing, the strategies is, or not with the strategies, so working on relationship building, working on improving what exists now, and then planning and innovating for what could exist. So some exciting projects that LAHSA has going on. One, we have a pilot project right now in place looking at how our homeless service delivery system, which is called the Coordinated Entry System, can work. The Coordinated Entry System, CES for short, yeah. So when you hear CES in LA, that is the homeless system. Just think about it. That is the direction it's going. And so this pilot project is looking at how to share information with respect to the DV needs of confidentiality and safety and things like that. So we hope to learn a lot about that. And then a second project that's really exciting is the county has decided to fund $1 million pilot project using rapid rehousing with survivors of domestic violence. So I'm actually project managing that pilot, and it's going to be a three-year pilot. And so there's so much innovation, there's so many opportunities to learn how we can sort of improve systems and trying things. And I think that we've got the will there. I think the relationship building that we're doing. I think we're generating a lot of good work, a lot of goodwill, and something's going to come out of it. I just know it.
Thank you. Cathy, since we're here in hosted island of between worlds, what do you see, or how do you see or playing a role in supporting survivors, homeless people, and others affected by it?
So, excuse me, it's sitting here and thinking about this, and this is the first time, it's been 25 years that Window Between Worlds has been sharing art as a tool of healing and transforming trauma, but I have never been in a dialogue that is looking directly at homelessness and domestic violence, which are so intersecting. And what I want to say is, in our work, we have been sharing art within many different settings. Domestic violence shelters, law enforcement, addiction recovery programs like Angel Step In is here today. There are so many intersecting issues, and listening to Bonin speak, I think as I talk about art and the role art plays, what I want to think about is the role of each of those clients in the program. And the role that art can play in creating a window of safety for that individual to even have the space to notice what they're thinking, what they're feeling, to have a tool to articulate without words, and to connect with those around them who are providing resources or who want to provide resources. And so with the Window Between Worlds, that's a piece. It's a key that we share, and that we began sharing 25 years ago. I'm the founder and began this just as an artist and as a survivor myself, and not meaning to start a nonprofit, as you know, and the power of sharing art as simply a window of safety. And so those who would come to the table maybe they're like, I hate art, I can't do art. What do we have to do? Sometimes when you're in a shelter, you don't necessarily want to be there, you don't necessarily feel safe there, and you don't necessarily want to do what you're told to do. And how do you find the safety to really connect with yourself and express what you're thinking, what you need, and really feel heard? And it was such an amazing experience to be there and say, you do not have to do anything. I'm here to share something I love. I'm sharing it as a gift, but you do not have to do it. And then I would say this art is a window of safety for you to honor and respect yourself. If what you need to do is put your head on the table and rest, do that. If what you need to do is stomp out of this room, do that. I'm going to share this art opportunity, but if what you need to do is tear up this paper, do that. This is your window of safety. And what happened through that window of safety was so powerful and so surprising. So participants would come to that table, like not wanting to come to that table, not expecting anything good to come of that. But then to be able to honor what comes out, to squish that clay, to be shocked at what they were able to get out that they hadn't gotten out in decades, and to feel a difference. I remember one survivor didn't even say a word. She didn't look like she wanted to be there. She did not share in the sharing circle at the end of the art. But the next morning she came to my room, because when I began this, I was doing it in exchange for room and board at the shelters. And so I was in a room. She knocked on the door. She said, "Can I share with you?" And she shared what she had created. And she said, this is the finger pointing at me, yelling. This one is a knot. It was a knot. This is my stomach in knots. And then this one, it was a little figure on the floor like that. She said, "This is me wanting to die." And she shared that, and she said she was able to sleep for the first time in years. She was able to feel relief. And she had tried everything. The shelter had told her therapy, writing, all the different things she could try. And she did not. She's one of the people who did not want to do art. So that's what Window Between Worlds shares, is a tool that is surprising. And we put it into the hands of those at domestic violence shelters, at homeless agencies, at law enforcement agencies, at all types of locations where we are trying to offer that window of safety for somebody to find their own voice, their own way to speak what they couldn't speak, and their own way to connect with the services around them. And as we've worked with homeless agencies, one of the blessings that's happened was just by surprise. One of the homeless veterans who had participated in our program had then gone on to get a job, and he happened to overhear someone randomly talking about Window Between Worlds, talking about the touchstones that we have here. And he said, "I don't mean to eavesdrop, but I participated in Windows, and it was the best part of the services that I got. It did more for me than therapy. It did more for me than other things, and I keep those touchstones by me every night. So I just want to share that that is that way that art can give someone themselves, and that it can be something they hold on to and carry, is the work that we do, and we're so delighted to get to share that with you all here, even with that question out there. How many of you put a touchstone on the piece out there? Yay, all right. Those of you who haven't, we're inviting everyone here to just think for you tonight. Think about what is safety? Where do I feel safe? And what enables me to feel safe? What allows me to feel safety? And to just define that for yourself and add it to the piece. And collectively, just by taking a moment to identify for that for ourselves, I hope that we deepen our commitment to work together, to address homelessness, to address domestic violence, and to find tools that give each person the dignity and the path for their voice, and something they can hold on to.
Thank you, Cathy. And I would add that that touchstone is really a connection, right? If trauma causes disconnection with self, with others, like that could be a connection back to self. And I feel like as a community too, that project is really connecting all of us, and especially around, and now we're looking at it even more broadly, not just domestic violence, but what is this intersection with homelessness, which actually you've known since you started in DV shelters, because the people we serve in our shelters are homeless. So, and finally, Anna, would you like to speak a little more as to what the city's doing and what's happening in the community?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So Councilmember Bonin's role as a special liaison has really morphed over time since he took office. When he first took office, it was annually we would, the task force would come lobby us to try to lobby the rest of council to backfill a lot of the funding that continues to be cut every year from federal funding that we receive for domestic violence shelters. And that happened annually, and as homelessness in general became prioritized in the city because we are in a state of crises, and years from now there will be multiple research papers written about this, about why. There's been talk of how it's not just the numbers are increasing, but perhaps people are more visible now because the city of Los Angeles has been sued multiple times in the past 5 to 10 years. That has infatuated a lot of our laws. So things like people sleeping on the street, people living in their cars, people having their belongings on the street, all these laws have been overturned in the city. So we're currently working on rewriting a lot of them while also offering services so in a way we can balance both protecting communities and also civil liberties, because we don't disagree with a lot of these decisions from the courts, because we've had bad policy. So as homelessness has become prioritized, it's become a priority for everyone. So, whereas before with domestic violence, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So, domestic violence is not a priority for everybody on council. So we take our office and several other members to really push everybody else. As homelessness has become a priority, so has domestic violence, because we found ways to integrate providing more of these services and offering funding. So a lot of our job is amplifying the voice of the task force, and which also speaks to how important advocacy organizations are, because were it not for them, so many things would not have been brought to our attention, because it's a massive problem. It's a wicked problem. The city passed a 67-point homelessness strategy with 67 different strategies as part of the comprehensive strategy. The strategy is a book like this big, in conjunction with the county. The county has its own. 47, yeah. So there's a lot of different strategies we've got. But and that's part of what's on the ballot in November. So we can't tell you how to vote, but this is part of that effort, is to help fund a lot of these programs. So, and we're not for groups like the task force and Eve and Carol. Certain things wouldn't have come to our attention, such as Councilmember Bonin is a big supporter of the safe parking program. So we are looking to launch a program modeled after what Santa Barbara's been doing, where we can offer people who live in RVs somewhere to park overnight as long as they're enrolled in some sort of program. So it's not just having a lot, it's working with a nonprofit, it's having people be enrolled in something so they're receiving services, there's security on site, it's safe, and they have somewhere to go. Because we can't tell people get off the street if there's nowhere to go. And we're now for, even Carol, one of the points that was brought up is to be part of how it's currently being proposed is to be part of this program, you have to be in the coordinated entry system, the match.com of connecting people with resources. However, a lot of domestic violence survivors are, have safety issues. So, many really important concerns where there was no way to bring them into that fold without disclosing their identity, and it's not something we can compromise. So that's been, things like that, that's just one example of how we need to work closer together and why these organizations are so important. And because of them, we've been able to help prioritize this for everybody else too, as part of all these different strategies. So, yeah, I think it's important to note that the services are very specific for a lot of victims. However, they don't need to be siloed. So it's very important to integrate. And if there's opportunities to kind of shift the way we kind of approach providing services to survivors, then we can open a lot more doors and more funding too and more resources. So it's just something I've been hearing from my conversations and it's encouraging.
Thank you. And just as a shelter provider, one of the things that we've seen over the past even just year is people staying in our emergency shelter longer because there's a lack of affordable housing, a lack of transitional housing to transfer them to, and they need more time because the people we serve are super poor. And so what used to, families would stay with us for about 3 weeks, but we're now staying in 6 weeks. And that's just, to double in a year is pretty traumatic for some of our organizations themselves because there's just nowhere for people to go. And we are seeing more and more people come in with their histories of domestic violence was a while ago versus the emergency situation of needing safe, confidential shelter. And so that takes up those beds for the people who need the safe and confidential shelter.
I'd like to just tell a couple of stories because I think we've been speaking in abstracts a lot, but the program that I'm in charge of at Sojourn is what we call support services, which is primarily targeted to women who are not in shelter. And we have a great many more clients who are not in shelter because there are not enough shelter beds. But it's also true that if a domestic violence victim goes into a crisis shelter, it really disrupts their lives. If they're working, they have to take a leave of absence from their job. Their children have to attend different schools because both of those, the work and school thing is a very, very vulnerable point in their existence, not only for them, but for the other people in our shelter. So typically, we bring people into our shelter who are from the other side of the county. We, I think, all look at about a 10-mile radius as being a safety buffer so that you're less likely to be seen by somebody who knows you, who might follow you back to the shelter and disclose the location of the confidential shelter. So going to shelter doesn't work for a lot of people. But we have clients who come to our support groups every week who are homeless. And the stories might not be what you think they would sound like. There's one mom who has a young daughter, and there was an incident with her husband where she called the police and he was arrested and charged with a misdemeanor, didn't do any jail time, but he moved out, got another apartment, and she hadn't been working, even though she had at one point held down a 6-figure salary. She'd been a stay-at-home mom, and so suddenly she had a lovely apartment and didn't have the means to pay the rent because in family court, the custody of the child was split 50-50, so there she was. So what she ended up becoming very resourceful and learned about Airbnb and so when her daughter went to stay with the father, she would move into her car and put her apartment up on an Airbnb rental, and that's how she managed to stay in that apartment. So, 50% of the time, she's living in her car. She's homeless. Not what you think of, The other thing we see is women who may end up on the street for financial reasons. Maybe they have a medical issue and are unable to work because of the medical issue, and then don't have the means to pay for an apartment. Then they're forced into living in their car, and because the streets are not safe and there isn't a safe parking program in place, they will connect with a male partner on the street for protection, and that turns into an abusive relationship. So speaking of it in really sort of abstract terms doesn't really tell the story. There are human stories all over our streets here.
Yeah, thank you. And for anyone who wants to answer, we're going to try to get through as many questions as we can, and then we need to run out. So if we don't get through all of them, we'll email you. What do you, any of you, if you'd like to take this question, what's the biggest barrier to DV survivors receiving services?
I think a huge one is simply their own self-awareness of being a domestic violence victim. When I was first doing emergency response with LAPD, I learned very quickly that when I was encountering a woman in her home, I wouldn't say, I'm from a domestic violence agency or a domestic violence shelter. I learned to say, I'm from an agency that helps women who are in a situation like you are. And it was easier to bridge that gap. People just, it's not a topic people like to talk about, so people aren't aware of what it means. And they also, a big thing is in how law enforcement defines domestic violence is, very specific about a physical injury, but we know that the coercive control is a much bigger factor in an abusive relationship, and it's harder to recover from.
I'd like to just echo the barrier of that seeing oneself as a victim or a survivor. We see that in the homeless system as well. That's one of the hugest barriers to engaging people is they don't see themselves as homeless. We've got homelessness it manifests in so many different ways. I mean, there's this, I think we're all familiar with the street homelessness and that very visible presence there. But, there's people couch surfing every night that are unstably housed or vulnerable, or staying in their cars, or, or just living in situations that they just we don't think of as homelessness. I think what's similar between our system and the domestic violence system, and I think I mentioned this to somebody earlier, is that I think we all have this sort of image in our mind about what a homeless person is, right? It's that street homelessness, and we sort of ascribe maybe the same characteristics to all those people that you see. You see them as a monolith, really. And I think that's sort of similar with domestic, in my estimation, that's similar with domestic violence survivors. Is you see it's usually a woman who's been battered by a man and maybe has some children,
those are, I think that's really a message we need to sustain. That people do get caught up in that drama of those people, and we just gotta get away from that.
Right. And it is so, it is very common, if we were talking about 1 in 3 women, 1 in 7 men, everyone in this room is probably familiar with someone who's experienced domestic violence, and it's not necessarily that battery charge, right? So, how can we raise this issue? Is it more of a community issue? And I think in the greater domestic violence movement, we're talking more about how do we reach out to those who harm and ensure that they are receiving services to prevent future harm. So, did anyone else want to speak to the barriers?
I was just gonna say, as I commented earlier, and LAHSA is piloting the program for CES doing intake anonymously, but that's been one of the things that's been brought to our attention pretty strongly, and I know that we, I mean, I speak in numbers, and unfortunately that's what we have to do to carry across this message to a lot of other people and to prioritize it, and it takes, percentages, and it takes, this is why it's a problem, and so, that it matrices. Yeah, so once that was brought to our attention, I mean, I really started seeing how that was like one of the #1 things is if somebody is seen by just a general shelter as a security risk, they're not going to take them, and the definitions of what qualifies someone as that and putting everybody else in danger and, going after the effort of educating everybody who is doing the intake and standardizing questions, I think is very important, and making sure that we're asking those kinds of relevant questions, not just, are you a victim, have you ever been a victim, but, is your abuser somebody who is alive even, or is in jail, or where are they, things like that. I think it's important to look at standardizing those questions. Yeah.
And then, can any of you share what are you seeing that's most challenging in this work, and what is most hopeful about this work?
I think the challenge that I've seen, and I know you and I have discussed this so much, I think is the intersection of homelessness and domestic violence. I think from these two systems, there's really two philosophies about how to move someone through the system, and I think that one challenge has just been this when you're talking about survivors of domestic violence, you're talking about people who literally have life and death scenarios, right? Like their safety it can be life or death for them, and that so that the concern from the community, from advocates to make sure they're safe, to have a safety plan, make sure confidentiality, all of those issues, it knocks up against so much of what the homeless system does in trying to, we want to share information, we want to, create those MOUs and, or memorandums of understanding. Sorry, acronyms. We want there to be transparency, we want there to be a flow, and, I think trying to integrate these systems and be respectful of the different philosophies has been a challenge. But where I see the opportunity and I'm hopeful is I think that we have someone like Councilmember Bonin, we have some county supervisors who are extraordinary and putting money out there for us to try things like a pilot program and see how a new housing model can work with this population, with a subset of this population. So, and let us try, giving us funding to be able to test out and figure out how can we get around these data requirements, how can we work with, confidentiality issue, and all of those things. We have to be able to innovate and try things and learn from other communities like Washington. That's what I see the whole.
I see, and Sheila Jewell actually founded our resource board, so
Yeah.
we got her.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think ties in with Window Between Worlds in particular is the whole increasing awareness of trauma-informed care. And we are focusing a lot on that with our clients because it's not just that they're homeless and traumatized, which means they can't function as well. But their own image of themselves, again, is that they should be. They should be back at 100% functioning as soon as they leave the abusive relationship. So, and they blame themselves for not being there. So that's we've integrated Windows programs into some of the things that we're doing with clients. And a lot of it is just about relearning self-care and regaining some autonomy, which is really what gets taken from an abusive relationship. That loss of autonomy is devastating, and it's very hard to get. So that's the challenge, and that's what again the public doesn't understand. You know, an employer will say they might be very helpful and supportive to an employee who's a victim of domestic violence, but 6 months later, it's like, okay, why aren't you over it? And they're not. I had the good fortune to work with the city of Los Angeles on their policy in support of employee victims of domestic violence, because the city of Los Angeles has 50,000 employees, and guess what? Some of them are domestic violence victims. Yeah, and so the city has had some good insight in recognizing that impact as well. But trauma is huge, and it's a real thing, and it really slows people down.
I would just add to that, in terms of challenging and hopeful, and slowing people down, I think one of the challenges that I've experienced has been how it feels when you see somebody in a violent situation and you want to help them. And I don't know how many people, probably many of us in this room have been in that situation. And I've also been talking to friends calling saying, I want to help my friend, how do I do that? And the challenge of offering support, but also knowing that person needs to find their timing and their path, and what it's like to live with someone in your family who's in that situation and who is not willing to take a step to change it. I say this with great honor for each person's own path, but it feels challenging. So like the police department, we were with seeing someone in a relationship for 20 years, but not being willing to get a restraining order. So the challenge of the time it takes for someone in trauma to be able to make those decisions that are their decisions, and the flip side of that, I would say that challenge of being patient with that, but the flip side is the hope, and the knowledge, like when I talk with somebody who's helping a friend or who's making a call about child abuse or whatever they're doing, to know that it makes a difference. What's hopeful is that it does make a difference. And that's what, having been doing this work for the years that I have, to even get to hear 18 years later, a survivor come back to us and say, 18 years ago, the paper was wet with tears, and I cried and I've gone back to the paper and drawing over these years until I could know it wasn't my fault and I could make a change. So the hopefulness that even that moment of being heard and having a tool is going to make a difference, even if it takes 18 years to happen. So I feel like that challenge and the hopefulness are kind of go together.
A question? Yes. Is there a question? It was a comment that both of what you just said, that it really sounds like you're saying that you're talking about the importance of the psychological services along with the home or the shelter and that's a complete equal part of it.
But I think in the homeless system, and I think what's similar about our system is, and in these populations, is that where they intersect, is that there is that psychological barrier that exists because of trauma. People experiencing homelessness often, if even, the longer you stay out on the street or unhoused, the more vulnerable you become, and the more likely you're going to experience trauma. So if you didn't, end up if you didn't end up homeless with domestic violence issues, you probably will accrue some sort of trauma in that area. And so I think, that psychological barrier, and anything that we can do, whether it be by, a really great art program, low barrier, easy to access art program, or some other sort of engagement. I see it as almost like harm reduction. It's like that idea that you keep reaching out, you keep engaging, you keep letting them know you're there, you keep offering them the art class, and eventually maybe at some point, you do that so often, and eventually they come around to it. It's like, at needle, I think I started my career at a needle exchange on Skid Row, and handing out clean needles, and that policy of harm reduction, and saying, look, I know I'm not going to change you, I'm not asking you to change, but I'm hoping you stay alive for long enough until you make that decision in yourself to change. And so I think, you get yourself there, and I think that's what the art programs do. That's what we try to do through our outreach and our engagement. I think that's really important.
My awareness is important too, because we're raising awareness, access to resources, and we do have a lot of resources available, and there's a lot of people who just have no idea they even exist. Very simple things like calling 211. Personally, I've used 211 for my own family to get services for my old brother, and people I work with in the city, I didn't even know it existed. The county's 211 system, which provides the nearest shelter, low cost or no cost mental health services, where to get the closest free meal, all sorts of things like that. And then you start getting into the system and you get connected to other resources, and you realize that you're following. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's a fine line between, making sure that people understand where we exist and survivors can contact us for support, and yet we don't have the capacity to really serve everybody who calls us. I think that there's real great, not scientific study done of just 6 of the DV shelters in LA City. 70% of callers who call for shelter are turned away because the shelter is full. So again, duplicated people probably calling multiple shelters, but when we're full, we just can't help more people. So.
When it comes to barriers, I know, and I think it happens at all shelters, but I know that one of the populations within the DV probably that is really hard to serve are undocumented immigrants. Just because, when it comes to, they're social, it's like, if they have children, then it's so much easier because they can access certain things just because of the children. But I wonder if, as all these pilot programs are coming up and all these things are happening, and I realize immigration in itself is it's a whole beast in itself. What are ways that also immigrant survivors that maybe just don't have as much access as somebody who
That's a really good point that you raised, and I think that as we roll out pilots, as we develop pilots, we want to keep in mind not just people experiencing domestic violence, but the other intersectional experiences that exist. So I think, and perhaps we can talk offline, so I'm not sure what the timing situation is, but I encourage you to look at the LAHSA. It's basically the Welfare Reform Act, federal act, and it, I think the Department of Homelessness, Housing and Urban Development recently released some guidance about this issue, about people with undocumented status, and that the funding, like what kind of funding your program receives. So I'm happy to point that resource or send it to
And I
the
think
organization.
the part of our challenge is that while our federal government may provide guidelines, how does it get down to the practice level of the person at the coordinated entry site understanding that that person can be served? I think immigration, you bring up a really important issue for our city, and a majority of who we serve are immigrants, and so the pilot projects that are happening now around rapid rehousing, domestic violence housing first, what we're hoping from those pilots is that what will come out is flexible funding works best for survivors, because there's no one box fits all, especially when you're transforming trauma. Some of the homeless programs are very prescriptive of this is exactly what needs to happen, this is how much time you have, and trauma doesn't heal that way. Everybody heals differently from trauma. So I'm hopeful that the pilot projects will show how important flexible funding is.
That's where my agency has been very fortunate in that we are under a much larger umbrella company which has private funds. Our ED's goal is to not have any government funding at all.
I think that's every ED's.
My goal is to change the number.
But we do have that cushion, and you know there was something that happened back in 2009 when the state of California fell over. We lost a lot of state funding, and that it didn't hit us so hard. We had cushion, but there were some of the rural shelters that closed. There were 6 shelters that closed in the state of California in 2009, and the governor at the time did a veto of the shelter funding, and it took us a couple of months to get that funding back, but 3 of those 6 shelters never opened again because they just couldn't sustain it. So we're a fragile system.
We'll take one more comment. Olivia, did you want to say something? Somebody else again. Oh, yes.
I live in Osceola, but when I first moved to California, I lived out here primarily, and I'm here to make an actress and the arts and everything to me. They saved my sanity. I think growing up acting saved my sanity, gave me some sense of self-identity. My question is, do you work with other organizations, because I know there's a Peace Like Peace downtown that creates mosaics. Are you branching? You're not just helping dealing with the therapy side, but also using artistic skills to be able to this out of Los Angeles. This is like this, my opinion is the West Coast version of Paris. It's like West, because our arts are so strong, and there's people that are doing so much skill. And I see honestly, they're doing fantastic artwork. It's just incredible. Selling on the street corners, we can't even hear it.
Well, just to say, we work with about 70 agencies throughout Los Angeles, and we provide training to their staff members so that they can use art as a resource for transforming trauma. Our work, I don't think the strength of it has been creating art as an expression and a healing is pretty different than creating art as a profession and like economic building, financial building, but both are so important. I love what Piece by Piece does, and that's a direction that I love that the Downtown Women's Center especially nurtures. And perhaps we could do more of that. It's really important. But I'd love to talk more if you're interested in being part of what we're doing. But I just want to do a shout out to Sojourn in the spirit of this night as a beginning of innovation and collaboration, and the city's work on homelessness, the county's work, being so innovative and collaborative right now. I just want to say that that Sojourn was the agency that let me, as this crazy artist, do weekly workshops there. That was the first place I went every Friday night. And it's that openness to innovation that creates amazing possibilities. And so in honor of what we all may create together and the ideas that are born here, I just want to salute Sojourn for that openness. Thank you.
Q&A. It's like 3 pages about measuring changing program that we keep talking about. It's pretty dense, but they're all on the table over there.
Is that on just the Los Angeles ballot?
Yes, city ballot, yeah.
What we have Santa Monica?
No, it's not.
Thank you all. I'd love to thank Elizabeth. What a wonderful program. Gave us lots to think about tonight, a lot. And if you want to take action, we have this resource table, as you heard. There's lots of information for you to get more involved in the conversation. Please also consider perhaps supporting some of these organizations. We have Rainbow and LAHSA and Sojourn and Winter Between Worlds. Of course, you can hear how much